I wasn't even supposed to know. That's the part that stuck with me, the way the truth slipped out, like a scrap falling from a table, something I was never meant to pick up. It was a Tuesday. Gray morning, air damp enough to make your boots feel heavier than they were. I'd stopped by Cooper's Hardware to get a replacement blade for my old handsaw, the one I'd kept since Dad taught me how to cut 2x4 straight without a guide. The store's bell gave that familiar tired ring when I pushed the door open. Old Cooper himself wasn't there. His boy Paul ran the place now. Paul had been 2 years behind me in school, all grown up now, thick in the waist, but with the same mop of hair. He gave me the polite nod you give someone you've seen your whole life but never really talked to. Morning, Dan. Hey, saw the moving trucks out at the Rourke place yesterday. Didn't know you were selling. That's how I found out. It landed like a stone dropped into my gut. Heavy, cold, immediate. I kept my face still. The one thing I learned from working 40 years around men who confuse noise for strength: silence can be sharper. Oh, I said. Just that. A single word. Paul shrugged, reaching under the counter for the blade I'd asked for. Yeah, big silver trucks. Couple of guys hauling furniture. Figured your brother was helping you downsize. I paid for the blade in cash. Didn't ask a single question. Didn't even blink when Paul bagged it like it was just another day. Inside, though, something old and brittle cracked. Driving back to my apartment, the roads looked different. I took the long route, out past Miller's Creek, so I could pass the old place. I told myself it was just curiosity. Truth was, I needed to see if it was real. The Rourke house sat like it always had. 2 stories of sun-faded clapboard and a porch that leaned just enough to make strangers uneasy. The lilac bush out front was bare now, just a tangle of gray stems. But there it was, a for sale sign. Not crooked, not weather-worn, but new. Freshly planted in the cold ground. I pulled over, let the truck idle. The front door was open, and through it I saw men I didn't know carrying the coffee table Mom had chosen when I was 13. The one she'd polished every Saturday morning, even when her back was too sore to stand straight. I didn't go in. I didn't call my brother. I just sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. I remembered the day we'd buried Dad. My brother, Michael, had worn a suit that didn't quite fit, a shade too tight in the shoulders. After the service, standing under that heavy sky, he told me we'd always keep the house. It's ours now, he'd said, voice steady in a way I wanted to believe. No matter what happens, this place stays Rourke. I'd taken him at his word. Foolish maybe, but when your only sibling looks you in the eye after you've lowered your father into the ground, you tend to believe him. Now, years later, the truth stood plain in the yard, a sign in the dirt, strangers in the doorway. I didn't need to storm in there or demand answers. No, I'd learned a long time ago that people who betray you will explain themselves in time if you let them, and the explanations would be for their comfort, not yours. I started the truck, drove away slow. I wasn't sure yet what I'd do, but I knew I wouldn't forget the sight of that coffee table leaving our home in someone else's hands. I didn't go to work that afternoon. I turned off Main and let the truck nose along the back roads where the pavement breaks into seams and the ditches hold last week's rain. The heater fan thumped on the low setting, and the cab smelled like cut pine from the boards I'd hauled the day before. A hawk kept easy pace above the power lines. Waiting for something smaller to forget the world is never safe. I needed air, not the kind that rushes at you on the highway and makes you feel like you're moving when you're only fleeing. I needed the kind that sits still and lets you think inside it. I pulled into the gravel turnout by the county reservoir, the one where Dad used to park the old Chevy and smoke in silence while Mom took us to her sister's, because she needed someone to talk to who wasn't a wall. I killed the engine and let the quiet gather. He tried dialing Michael twice, hung up both times before it rang. There's a difference between wanting to hear a voice and wanting to give someone the chance to lie to you. The second one is a favor, and I wasn't feeling generous. The water was flat, a sheet of dull tin. A few coots stitched little black commas along the surface and left no sentence behind them. I watched until my jaw unclenched. Then I took out the old key. It lived in my wallet, a stowaway behind the faded photo of Mom and Dad on their wedding day. Full house key, the kind no one makes anymore. Brass worn shiny along the grooves where my thumb had chased every worry for the last 20 years. I'd never used it in years. Michael had changed the locks for safety, he'd said once, and handed me a new key that turned in nothing. I kept the old one anyway. You don't throw out a promise, even when you know it's expired. I flipped it over in my palm. It caught the weak sun and threw off a mean little glint, a thing that once opened a door and now served only to measure how far I'd let myself drift. From the reservoir, the road loops toward the ridge where the cell tower lives, like an unwelcome neighbor. I let the truck find its way there because I knew that if I was going to do this, I'd need reception. The wind was up on the ridge. It kept shouldering the truck, giving the body a slow, steady rocking I felt in my ribs. I didn't call Michael. I called the county records office. The woman who answered sounded like someone who had seen it all twice. Her voice was careful without being kind. I gave her the parcel number from memory. I told her my name, told her the property had been in the family since 1969, told her I was trying to confirm something. Paper doesn't lie, I said, and she let out a small sound that might have been a laugh if it had warmth. There were typing sounds, the decisive little taps of someone walking down a hallway they know too well. Then the woman said the date and the name of the buyer, and a sale price that felt like a joke a cruel person would tell at a wake. She read the deed reference. She read the lender's name. She paused. "Do you want me to email the documents?" she asked. "Yes," I said, "please." When I gave her my address, my voice sounded like it had been left in a shed all winter, and only now brought back into the light, a little warped, a little tight. "Anything else I can do for you today?" she asked, as if what she'd already done weren't enough to turn a man into a quieter version of himself. "No," I said. "You already have." Back down the ridge, I idled under a bare sycamore and opened my phone. The PDFs loaded slow, page by page, like someone measuring out a slow confession. There it was. The signature I knew, like the back of my hand. The same loop on the K, the same dot on the I, like he'd hesitated at the last second. Date of transfer. Title company I'd driven past 100 times and never thought about. The lender's name in big clear type, all of it tidy, as if decency were a formatting choice. There were more pages, things you only read once in your life and wish you didn't have to. Riders and disclosures. The adjustable rate that looked friendly in month 1 and hungry by month 12. And then a small clause. Not the kind a person raises a glass to, but the kind that sits in a corner and waits. It was the assignment of note language. Simple words. Big teeth. I closed the phone and set it face down on the bench seat, like it was an animal I didn't want to startle. The heater clicked inside. The wind came at the truck again. In the distance, a chainsaw took a bite out of the afternoon and then stopped, as if it had remembered its manners. The first year after Dad died, Michael and I had argued about whether to cut down the old elm by the side fence. He said the root was lifting the stones, and he was right. I said the tree kept summer a little cooler, and I was right too. We let it stand, not because we agreed, but because we were brothers, and sometimes that used to be enough. I thought about that now, about how easy it is to call something ours when it hasn't been tested by hunger. I drove home on the slow side. In the lot behind my building, a kid on a skateboard scraped his trucks along the curb, fell, stood, and tried again. The resilience of people who haven't yet learned what it costs to get back up. I envied him for a moment, then didn't. He'd find out soon enough. Up the stairs, careful with the left knee. The apartment smelled like last night's coffee and machine oil from my jacket. I put water on for tea because coffee felt too talkative for the kind of day I was having. While the kettle worked, I sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and wrote down 3 lines. Solidate. Buyer's name. Lenda Servicer. Underneath, I wrote one more word. Why. Then crossed it out. Paper doesn't care why. Paper only cares what and when and who. The kettle sang. I poured over the bag and watched the color climb through the water, slow and certain. My hands shook just enough to give the surface a small tremor. When it settled, I took a sip and burned the tip of my tongue. I welcomed the sting. It told me I was still in the room. I have never had a lot of money. I had enough. Enough to keep the lights on and help a neighbor patch a roof and send a check when the high school asked for donations to keep the shop class from dying. Enough to set aside a little each month because Dad had once told me the world was built to surprise you and that you should try to surprise it back. Enough to know the difference between an expense and an investment. The note, if it was assignable, and most are, was not cheap. But it was not impossible either. There are things worth more than their price. On my second cup, I opened the laptop and searched for the loan servicer, whose name sat on the deed like an old stain. I navigated the menus that seemed designed to make you give up. I found the department that handles note sales to institutional investors. Then I dialed the number and left a message with a voice I kept even, the way you keep a board steady when the saw is sharp. While I waited, I made a list of people who'd picked up when I needed them. Mr. Alvarez, from the credit union who'd given me a loan for the shop renovation 15 years ago. Darlene at the title office who used to play softball with Mom. Jonas the realtor who understood that sometimes a price is also a position. I didn't know if I'd need them. I wrote their names anyway, as if the ink could make a small web to catch me if I fell. The phone rang at 4:17. The caller ID showed a city I don't visit unless the DMV gives me no choice. A man introduced himself with a friendly voice that had nothing behind it. I told him I was inquiring informally about the possibility of purchasing a newly originated note secured by a single-family property in our county. I gave the parcel number. He asked me to hold. A new voice came on, a woman this time, efficient, with a dignity that felt earned. We spoke in nouns, rates, terms, portfolio, assignment, verification. She asked if I represented an entity. I told her the truth. I represent an interest. She said she couldn't promise anything. I said I wasn't asking for a promise. I was asking for a process. The difference matters to people who mean what they say. She took my email, said someone from secondary marketing would reach out. I thanked her and hung up. The clock hands were fat with the hour. The day had decided what kind of day it wanted to be, and I had decided what kind of man I would be inside it. In the late light, I took the truck out again, not toward the house, but toward the cemetery. It's a crooked road you don't find by accident. The stones there lean like old shoulders, and the grass grows in clumps, high enough that the mower can't pretend it's winning. I parked under a pecan tree with no leaves, left to pretend the season hadn't ended. I walked to our family plot. The ground doesn't remember your footsteps, which is why you have to. Dad's marker is simple. Name, dates, a line Mom picked. He did what needed doing. I put my hand on the stone the same way I did when I was 20, and thought death was a thing that happened to other people's stories. I'm going to handle it, I said, not loud. The wind, which had been moving restlessly all afternoon, settled its hands on my coat and became still. On the walk back to the truck, I thought about Michael's laugh when we were boys high and bright, the kind that made you forgive him for tracking mud across the kitchen, because joy has a way of arguing its own case. I thought about how it changed after he turned 30, got a job that required him to stand in rooms where people mistook charm for character, where the floor was always wet with the spill of someone else's enthusiasm. His laugh got lower, then rarer, then conditional. You could earn it, but you couldn't trust it. People will tell you betrayal happens all at once like a door slam in a quiet house. I know better. It's a file dragged across steel, once, twice, 100 times, until the lock finally doesn't hold. You hear the final scrape and think that's the sound that mattered. It isn't. The work was already done inside the metal. Dusk came early. I drove back through town. The for sale flyer box by the front walk of our old house was already half empty. Someone had been curious. Or many someones. In the living room window, a figure moved the new owner, I assumed. The paperwork the county had sent said a name I didn't recognize. A young couple from the next town over. I didn't feel anything toward them. That's not where feeling belongs. He didn't stop. But at the corner, where the boundary oak used to drop acorns so thick you couldn't step without cracking one, I pulled over long enough to look up at the low clouds and think how much sky a person needs to make a decision. Not much, it turns out. A sliver is enough. Back at the apartment, I sat again at the kitchen table with the legal pad. I drew a line under the day's notes and wrote a new heading, When. Under it I wrote, when the servicer calls, when the price is named, when the assignment is drafted, when the notice is delivered. 4 wins, like fence posts. Between them, the kind of field where work gets done. At 7:06 p.m., an email came in from an address with too many consonants. Attached, a preliminary packet, the kind that makes serious eyebrows go up and unserious people back away. A checklist for proof of funds. A projected yield. A number that was not small. I felt the room tilt a little. Then it righted itself. The way rooms do for people who decide they won't be thrown, I replied, with a kind of message that looks brief, because it is. I attached statements. I left out the part where my hands were steady, because I had trained them to be, not because the moment deserved it. Before bed, I took the old key out of my wallet again and held it by the bow. It swung gently, a pendulum with nowhere to be. I set it on the table and placed the new documents beside it, edge-aligned, like a compromise two parties could live with until morning. The night wasn't loud. A neighbor's television bled through the wall in polite murmurs. A train 2 miles off laid its horn down flat and long. Somewhere, the kid with the skateboard tried the curb again and kept trying until the scrape became a rhythm, and the rhythm, finally, a small song. I slept badly, but I slept, because you can't do the work if you don't let your mind put its tools back on the rack for a few hours. In the thin gray just before morning, I woke with a thought simple enough to be true. Love is a kind of account you can overdraw. So is patience. I had paid both, in full, with interest. The overdraft notices had been slow to arrive. I'd received them now. By the time the sun put a clean edge on the windowsill, I'd made coffee, shaved, and put on the shirt with the good collar. The phone sat face down on the table, quiet, obedient. The legal pad waited, patient and yellow. The old key lay where I'd left it, shining a little in the winter light like a promise, from a time when promises were cheaper and somehow worth more. When the call comes, I'll answer. When the price comes, I'll pay it. When the paper comes, I'll sign. There will be no speeches. There will be no explanations. I have learned to let the work be the words. And for the first time since Paul at the hardware store mentioned the trucks, I felt something nearly like relief. Not because anything had been repaired, but because the break was finally named. The kettle began to whisper. Outside, the day arranged itself the way days do. Mail to be delivered, dogs to be walked, a cashier practicing kindness without needing to. I poured the water and watched the color deepen, slow and steady, like a plan coming into focus. I didn't call Michael. I didn't need to. I would see him soon enough on paper first, where men like him rarely look for their brothers. And then maybe later on a porch he no longer owned. If he asked me why, I would tell him the truth in a voice I had kept in good condition for exactly this purpose, because you sold what wasn't only yours. I put the cup down, capped the pen, and drew one last line across the page, as neat as I could make it. A chapter break, nothing more. Tomorrow I would turn the page. The Rourke house was never much to look at. A square of clapboard painted white when my parents bought it in 2069, though the paint didn't stay white for long. Summers baked it toward beige, winters dusted it gray. But the bones were good. Dad used to say the place would stand longer than either of us, and for years I believed him. I came into the world in the back bedroom, the one with the narrow closet that smelled faintly of cedar no matter the season. Michael had the larger front bedroom because he was older by 3 years. That was our parents' logic. Firstborn gets first pick. I didn't fight it. I was used to making do with what was left. And I learned early that if you can make a small space your own, it can feel bigger than anything money can buy. We were a working-class family in the truest sense. No one had an office job. No one had paid vacations. Dad ran the garage down on Ash Street, a squat building with a tin roof and a cracked concrete floor stained every shade of oil. Mom worked at the diner, 12 years straight on the breakfast shift. She wore her hair up, always, and when she came home at 2 in the afternoon, the house would smell faintly of bacon and dish soap. When I was 12, the furnace went out in February. Not just a hiccup, the whole thing failed. It was the kind of winter where the frost on the inside of the windows never melted, even when the stove ran all day. The repairman told Dad the cost, and I saw something flicker in his face. Fear, maybe, or just the knowledge that whatever savings they had would go right into keeping us warm. That was the first time I took on paying work. I shoveled driveways, chopped wood for the Smith family 2 roads over, and stacked bags of feed at the co-op until my back ached. I handed every bill to Mom at the end of the week. She told me I didn't have to. I told her I did. Michael was in high school then, talking about moving to the city. He did odd jobs when asked, but mostly kept to himself. He had a knack for keeping his hands clean, not just literally but in life. I never resented it, not then. I figured every family needs someone who doesn't get dirt under their nails, someone to keep the nice clothes nice. When Dad got sick, I was 23 and just starting at the machine shop. The pay wasn't bad, and I'd gotten steady hours. The doctor's visits and treatments weren't covered by much insurance, just enough to tease you into thinking it would help. I started covering the property taxes to free up what little Mom and Dad had for the bills. That went on for 4 years, Every January, I'd walk the payment down to the courthouse and hand it over in cash. I kept the receipts in a shoebox in my closet, not because I doubted my parents, but because paper has a way of telling a cleaner truth than memory. The roof leaked twice during that time. The second time was bad enough to ruin the ceiling in the upstairs hallway. I took a week off work to strip it back and lay down new shingles. Michael came by once, in a pressed shirt and slacks, to see how it was going. He told me I should have hired someone. I told him hiring someone would have cost more than the materials. He said nothing after that, just left early for a meeting in town. Dad passed in 2096. Mom followed in 2003. Those were the bookends. And in between was just the work of keeping the house breathing, painting, patching, replacing the sagging porch steps with boards salvaged from a barn teardown 2 towns over. I didn't live there full time. I rented a small place near the shop. But I was at the house most weekends, mowing in the summer, plowing in the winter. Michael had moved back by then, after a stint in real estate that didn't pan out. He was there to help Mom, but the helping seemed to involve more sitting than doing. Still, I never pressed the point. Family gets more leeway than they deserve. When Mom's will was read, the house went to both of us, 50-50. I remember thinking it was fair. We were both her sons. It was the only home either of us had truly known. We'd keep it in the family. For the next 10 years, I carried most of the weight without complaint. Property taxes, replacing the furnace again in 2010, updating the wiring so the insurance company wouldn't drop coverage. None of it glamorous, all of it necessary. Michael was there, but not in the ways that leave fingerprints. He'd nod at the finished work, talk about how nice it looked, then disappear for weeks. When I'd mention splitting costs, he'd tell me he was tight this month, or between deals. I told myself it was fine. You don't keep score in family. But the truth is, I did keep score, just not out loud. Every receipt went into the shoebox. Every check I wrote got its own line in a notebook I kept in the top drawer of my desk. I never showed it to anyone. It wasn't about leverage, not then. It was about remembering. The last major repair I paid for was the septic system. I got the call from Michael in July. There's a smell out back, and the grass is too green near the tank. If you've lived with septic, you know what that means. I called the guy I'd used before, and 3 days later, we had a new tank in the ground and a lighter bank account. Michael said he'd cover half. That was the last time I heard him talk about it. When I think back on those years, I don't remember the exhaustion as much as I remember the quiet satisfaction of seeing the place stand through another winter. The sag in the porch beam I'd fixed stayed fixed. The paint I'd rolled on in the fall didn't peel come spring. Those were the wins. Small ones, but mine. Now, sitting here with the paperwork from the county spread out on my table, I see the through line I missed before. Every sacrifice I made, every dollar, every weekend, every favor called in, was based on the belief that we were building something together, that the house wasn't just wood and nails, but proof that we'd stood shoulder to shoulder against the years. It turns out, Michael had been standing somewhere else entirely, and I don't think I'd fully felt the weight of that until now. There's a catalog I carry in my head, the inventory of the ordinary things I did so the house would keep breathing. The list is long and unremarkable, which is the point. I recocked the upstairs tub in a heat wave and watched the new beads settle like a steadying hand. I tuned the old window sashes with a candle stub so they'd slide without shrieking. I drove 60 miles for a used storm door whose hinge line matched the ghost pattern on our frame. The seller tried to tell me it was vintage, as if rust were a pedigree. I measured twice and cut the shim slow. The door settled in like it had been waiting for a reason to keep the rain out. Most of these fixes had a sound attached. The plink of a bucket catching a roof leak, the thwack of a mallet seating a stubborn joist hanger, the small sigh of a pilot light catching after you've bled the line and asked the air to behave. When I think of childhood, sure, there are birthdays and field days and one spring with a litter of barn kittens. But more than that, there's the soundscape of maintenance, not loud, just persistent. Michael drifted through those years like a weather system that preferred the long view. He did help, sometimes, in ways that fit cleanly into his schedule and required no learning curve. He'd pick up sacks of salt for the water softener when I reminded him. He'd drive Mom to the pharmacy and leave the receipts curled in a dish by the phone, unpaid. He greeted neighbors like a mayor of something and could give a eulogy on short notice that made people cry in exactly the right places. Useful skills, I told myself. Not my skills, but a family. is better for different tools in the box. I think about a Saturday in late April when the creek jumped its banks, as it does when the thaw and the rain make a bargain behind your back. The crawl space took on water. I pulled on boots that pinched my heel and went under with a shop vac and a length of hose. The air tasted of puddled iron. I moved slow so I wouldn't rattle the old footings. When I came up, hair plastered down and shoulders aching, Michael was on the porch with a glass of iced tea he hadn't made. He nodded at the cloud shelf rolling in from the west like a low, thoughtful animal. "Gonna be a wet one," he said, as if that were news, and not the hymn I'd been singing for 2 hours in a cramped, dark choir loft. There was no malice in him then. There was vacancy. And vacancy, I learned, makes its own weather too. When Mom's hip went, we added grab bars in the bathroom. I set them where her hand naturally reached in the night. I learned the ritual of wrapping the drill bit with tape to mark the proper depth so I wouldn't chase holes too far and hit wire living where the plan said it shouldn't live. Not all plans survive contact with real life. Her thanks were soft, almost embarrassed, like I'd bought her flowers. And she didn't want to make a fuss in case the petals felt burdened by praise. Money was a long, low hill. We never reached the top of it, but the climb built certain legs. I could read a statement the way other people read a face, find what was missing by how the present parts refused to settle. When fees crept in, I made calls. When insurance threatened a premium jump, unless we modernized our risk profile, I burned out the old knob and tube in the attic and pulled new runs with a headlamp and a prayer. It was not the best way. It was the way we could afford. The inspector, when he finally came, was a small man with a clean clipboard and a kind patience for people doing their own work. He passed us with a glance that said he understood what it means to keep a house out of the teeth of the world. Michael liked to say we were asset rich, cash poor. He said it like a joke, but with the cadence of a lament he wanted you to admire. The thing about a phrase that fits on a bumper sticker is it rarely survives the weather. We were not rich, in any sense the asphalt would honor. We were solvent, which is a more interesting word. It suggests a substance in which other things dissolve. It suggests you can carry someone else's weight and not change shape. I did. And I did not, for a long time, resent the solution I had become. The shoebox grew heavy. I updated the notebook without flourish. Date, amount, reason, check number. No underlines. No stars. Sometimes, after the day had been loud with machines and the evening too quiet with the long hum of the refrigerator, I'd take the box down and look at the paper like you look at an old injury to remind yourself you survived it. The receipts had a smell ink and a little stale glue. Memory in honest clothes. If there was a pivot, if there has to be one for the story to behave, it might be the Christmas when Michael announced we should start hosting at his place, which was our place, which made the sentence mean more than it said. He'd strung white lights along the porch rail in a way that made them look like they were trying not to commit. Inside, he'd set the table with the good dishes Mom used to loan out to neighbors who forgot to return the best pieces. He'd placed the turkey in the center, like a peace treaty, laid down by a man who wasn't at war. We ate. We laughed. The house did the thing houses do when people stop long enough to become furniture. A warmth gathered in the corners and dared the dark to enter. After dessert, he stood and tapped his glass. The sound was wrong for the room, too sharp, but we all looked anyway. He thanked us for coming, thanked me for all the heavy lifting this year, the phrase landing lightly, like a tiny bird that doesn't know another word for itself. Then he spoke about consolidating family interests, about efficiencies, about unlocking equity. He was not pitching us, not exactly. He seemed to be practicing the speech for a room he wanted to be asked into. It was only later, clearing plates at the sink, that he placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "You know, we should talk about streamlining the deed, clean it up, make it easier to manage." His voice was brotherly warm without heat. I said we could talk after the new year. He smiled like I'd agreed to everything. Here I should confess something no one asked me to. I am not innocent of wanting peace at the cheapest price. I heard what I wanted to hear a delay, not a direction. I thought a conversation would put the house back in the same place it had always been, the place where effort sits on one side and names on the other, and the balance is a matter of habit more than law. I should have known better. Habit is a great liar. It tells you tomorrow will recognize you because yesterday did. When Mom died, We sat side by side in the attorney's office with a bowl of lemon candies on the table between us. The lawyer had a genteel monotone that went with his carpeting. He read clauses and contingencies, while we sucked on sugar and scanned the room for our mother's smell. When he reached the part where the house came to us in equal shares, Michael exhaled, like he'd been holding his breath for a page. "That's fair," he said, and for years I let that sentence narrate my chores. I kept the old hand tools in good order, oiled the plane, replaced the hammer handle when it split along a knot, honed the gouge Dad used to carve the little fish that hung in the kitchen window. Some afternoons I'd stand in that square of sun on the floor and let the dust drift through like a gentle snow. It was a quiet I'd earned, and I took it without apology. That's the part that burns in a clean way now. Not the money, not even the labor, but the hours I filled with care, because I believed care mattered. It does, just not always the way you think. Care didn't stop the sale. Care did something else I didn't appreciate until the truck showed up with strangers lifting our table. It trained me to recognize the sturdy things. Processes, not promises. Paper, not speeches. The grip I have on patience is the same grip you use to set a nail straight on the first swing. The trick is in your wrist, not your arm. People like to say a house is a memory machine. Maybe. Ours was a classroom. It taught me to over-prepare, to stock a second gasket because the first will slip at dusk when stores are closed. It taught me to label the breaker box clearly and to date the filter you forget to change. It taught me to listen to a floor and tell whether it needs another screw or a person to walk lighter. Michael's lessons were different. He learned what a signature could do, which is a kind of carpentry too. He learned that a notarized page travels faster than a story. He learned that if you speak with enough measured reasonableness, some doors will swing open before you knock. Those lessons aren't crimes. They are choices, and choices accrue. I remember the afternoon I signed the refinance on my own truck. The loan officer slid the packet across the desk and tapped where my name should go. The pen they provided was heavy, as if mass could convince you of dignity. I glanced up at the wall and saw the framed calligraphy of a mission statement no one read after it was hung. The room smelled faintly of toner and something floral that wanted to be called success. My signature looked steady. I paid the note off early. That day taught me something about instruments and intent. A pen is a hammer. You can build or break with it. But either way, you'll be the one who says you only meant to hang a picture. Somewhere along those years, Michael began to use the phrase, "my house," in public. Never to me, he had a private vocabulary for us, and a public one for everyone else. At church, he'd tell the pastor, "We'd love to host the potluck at my house." At the 4th of July cookout, he'd say, "Swing by my place after the fireworks." It landed on me like a gnat lands on the back of your neck. A small enough annoyance that you swat without thinking, and miss half the time. Once, in line at the hardware store, the young clerk asked if we were doing a kitchen redo. "At my house," Michael said, smiling at the man's ring of keys like they were medals. I wondered if he heard the possessive the way I did. I told myself, language is imprecise. I told myself he was warming to the idea of responsibility. You can be kind to a mistake, so long you end up hosting it. The last sacrifice I'll name, not because it was the worst, but because it rings the clearest now. The night the heat cut out again in late October, and a cold moon made the yard a hard blue. I brought over the kerosene heater from my shop, cracked 2 windows because I respect the kind of death you can't smell, and stayed on the couch until morning to make sure the pilot on the furnace didn't ghost us. Michael slept upstairs, the way a child sleeps when he believes someone else's wakefulness is love. At 3, I went down to the cellar with a wool cap on and coaxed the flame back with a long lighter and a patience I didn't know I'd bought and paid for. When the burner caught, it made the sound a tired animal makes when it agrees to stand. I felt that sound in my ribs until spring. The house kept its side of the bargain. It stood. It kept us. It received holidays and groceries and mail and bad news, and the small good fortune of peaches in season. It learned new names for our neighbors' kids and forgot old grudges with the soft rot of time. It deserved better than what happened. But deserving never saved a roof. If you ask me why I didn't see this coming, I'll tell you I did. Not as a headline, not as a blow. I saw it as whether you watch from far off a charcoal smear at the horizon, the air dulling like a thought that won't complete. I just kept working under it. That's the thing about a slow storm. You convince yourself it respects your labor. Now I sit with the documents clean, untroubled font, margins doing their little job. I put one of the old receipts beside them, the paper yellowed and thin at the corners. They're both true. The difference between them is the difference between a hand and a stamp. One shakes a little, one does not. Do I regret the work? Number work is its own kind of shelter. It built the muscles I need now. It taught me the choreography of patient, repeatable action. It trained my mouth to close when other people open theirs too wide. There is a form on my table that will, if the numbers lean my way, deliver the mortgage like a key I can actually use. It's not revenge. Not exactly. It's alignment. The ledger wants to balance, and I am tired of arguing with arithmetic. I rinse my mug and set it in the rack, where the sun, reluctant as ever, puts a thin stripe across the handle. The apartment carries the uncomplicated scent of dish soap and hot ceramic. A cheap clock insists on being noticed. Down the hall, a neighbor laughs and then says, "I'm sorry," in the way people do when they realize thin walls carry joy as readily as rage. I take the shoebox down one last time. Not for accounting, not for proof, just for farewell. I leaf the receipts with my thumb and watch the edges flip, like a flipbook animation of a house refusing collapse. I tie the box with twine, the kind you keep for no reason that quickly becomes a reason. I set it beside the door. I will not throw it out. You don't throw out a record of yourself. But I will stop consulting it, as if it could vote. When the phone rings, and it will, because people who want to move paper are punctual, I will answer with the same muscles I've used to lift beams, to carry sacks, to turn soil. There will be a number. I will find it ugly, and then find it acceptable. I will become, with a signature, the thing I have always been in practice, but never in name. The person who keeps the house honest. If you want a single sentence to close the years behind me, take this. I did what needed doing because no one else would. It's not noble. It's a habit. Habits win. The window glass shivers a little with a gust, then settles. Somewhere in town, a train bell counts the crossing. I check the lock out of reflex, feel the bolt ride home with the soft finality of a plan that has decided to be real. The house I grew up in taught me that sound. It's the sound of a door that knows its owner. I put on my jacket, check my wallet for the things that always live their ID, the folded photo, the old key. I leave the key where it is. It belongs to a door that no longer exists for me. When I step into the hall, the light catches the grain in the wood floor, and for a second it looks like the boards are flowing forward, carrying me with them. Maybe they are. The real betrayal wasn't the sale. It was the casualness of it. You can brace for a storm when the sky goes black and the air turns metallic. You can't brace for a man standing next to you in the checkout line, asking if you've settled in okay after your move when you haven't moved. You can't prepare for betrayal that's already happened, signed, stamped, and filed, before you even know you should be defending yourself. It happened at the feed store. I was there to pick up salt licks for a neighbor's cattle, something I still did from habit, because work has a way of multiplying if you're the sort of person who says yes. I was standing by the counter, waiting for the kid to load my order, when Rick Hanlon, the real estate agent, sidled up. Rick's a man whose smile you can hear before you see it broad, a little too pleased with itself. He clapped me on the shoulder like we'd won something together. "Dan, didn't know you were moving on," he said. All warmth and assumption. I looked at him. I let my face be the empty page people don't know how to read. Moving? He gave me that little laugh some people use when they think you're being modest. "Heard you got a good price for the place. Mike told me it went quick. Buyers were itching for it." The sound in my ears wasn't his voice anymore. It was the memory of the front porch steps under my boots, the ones I'd replaced twice. It was the creak of the old screen door in summer, and the hollow echo in the hallway when the house was too quiet. Those sounds all ran together, and then they stopped, like someone cutting the cord on a radio. I don't remember leaving the store. I must have, because the salt licks ended up in the truck bed. But I remember the drive, how every fence post looked like a metronome, ticking out the fact that I'd been made irrelevant in my own story. That night, I didn't eat. I sat at the table with the county records open again, reading them like they'd rearrange themselves if I stared long enough. I'd already seen the buyer's name. Now I saw the line where the property transferred from Michael Rourke and Daniel Rourke, joint tenants, to Michael Rourke, sole owner, and then 2 weeks later to the new couple. The gap was the part that dug its teeth in. 2 weeks. That meant he'd had to have the paperwork ready before the transfer. He'd had to file to remove my name first, quietly, legally, without telling me. There's a lot you can call that. Streamlining is what he'd probably say. Betrayal is what I'll keep. I didn't call him. I knew if I did, the conversation would be theater, and I didn't want to give him the stage. Instead, I called Carla, the clerk at the title office, who'd been a year ahead of me in school and never forgot the way things actually happened in this town. When I told her what I was looking at, she made a small sound in her throat. Not pity recognition. She told me the quitclaim deed, removing my name, had been signed in Michael's kitchen. Witnessed by a neighbor, filed the next morning. She told me the sale contract to the new buyers had been drafted before my name was even off the title. Dan, she said, her voice steady but not cold, this was in motion for months. Months. That's what hit me hardest, not the fact of it, but the length. The idea that he'd sat across from me at Christmas, watching me fix the wobbly table leg, knowing full well he'd already decided to cut me out. The idea that when he'd borrowed my ladder to clean the gutters in April, he'd done it on a house he planned to sell without my say. Betrayal isn't just an act. It's the rehearsals you don't see. I pulled out the shoebox, not because I needed evidence, but because I wanted to see the whole weight of what I'd carried. There they were, receipts for taxes, for shingles, for gallons of paint, handwritten notes from contractors who gave me neighbors' rates, warranty cards for appliances bought in my name, for a house that no longer had it. It was all there, in paper and ink, like a biography written in transactions. For a moment, I thought about driving to his place, our place, and confronting him on the porch. But that's the move of a man who wants the other person to admit guilt. I didn't need his admission. I already had the truth, filed at the courthouse, notarized, and public record. What I needed was to decide what to do with it. I slept in my chair that night, the kind with the cracked leather arms, where your back doesn't quite forgive you in the morning. I woke at 4:17. The number still in my head from the call I'd been waiting for from the mortgage servicer. It hadn't come yet, but it would, because now it wasn't just about getting the house back. It was about making the deed and the debt sit in the same hands mine and letting the math do the rest. The betrayal was complete. My turn was next. The thing about betrayal is that it always leaves fingerprints. Not the smudged kind you dust for, but the kind pressed into routine things that don't add up in hindsight because you didn't know you were supposed to be counting. After Carla told me how the paperwork had been timed, I started walking back through the last year like a man retracing his steps after dropping something in tall grass. It was all there, hiding in plain sight. The first print, that lunch in March. Michael had called me out of the blue, said we should catch up. He picked the place Henderson's Diner, which is the kind of spot where the waitress calls you on whether you're 18 or 80. I remember him asking about the shop, asking if I'd thought about slowing down my hours. Not everyone wants to work till they drop, he'd said, smiling over his club sandwich. At the time, I thought it was just his way of poking at me for being stubborn. Now, I hear it differently, like a man taking your measure for something you don't know you're being fitted for. The second print, the insurance notice in June. A letter had come addressed to both of us about the homeowner's policy needing renewal. I'd called him to say we should get it handled before the lapse date. He'd said, "Don't worry about it, I've got it covered." He never mentioned that he was already making arrangements for the policy to list him as sole insured. The third print, the way he'd started locking certain drawers in Dad's old desk. That desk had been in the front room for decades. We kept spare keys, a flashlight, even a few crumpled envelopes of emergency cash in there. It wasn't the kind of thing you locked because it wasn't the kind of house where you locked things from each other. But sometime around late summer, I noticed a small brass key on his chain that hadn't been there before. "You keeping state secrets now?" I joked. He'd laughed too fast, too wide. The fourth print, the garage sale. It had been billed as clearing out the clutter, which sounded reasonable enough. Mom's mixing bowls, the old fishing rods, a stack of 1,972nd National Geographics. It was the usual purge. But mixed in were things that weren't clutter at all. The wool blanket from Dad's Navy days, the hand crank grinder I used every deer season, even the brass door knocker we'd taken off during the last repaint. He told me the buyers offered a good price, and that we weren't using those things anyway. I remember feeling a small pull in my chest but letting it go, because arguing over objects felt petty. I didn't realize then it was about erasing my presence a piece at a time. The fifth print, that last phone call before the sale. It had been 2 weeks before I saw the for sale sign. He'd called to say the gutters needed cleaning and asked if I still had the big ladder. I said yes. I'd bring it by on Saturday. When I got there, the ladder was the only thing he took from me that day. Not a word about the buyers. Not a word about the closing date already on the calendar. He shook my hand at the end like nothing was pending. Looking back now, it's not that I missed the signs, it's that I misread them. When you think you're on the same side, you interpret someone's secrecy as absent-mindedness, not preparation. That night, after going over these moments until they felt like a bad reel stuck on repeat, I opened my laptop. I went to the county's property search page and typed in Michael's name. It wasn't just our house. There were 2 other properties, small parcels he'd bought and flipped in the last 3 years. Both had short turnaround times. Both had paperwork that changed names in quiet little steps. This wasn't his first time dancing this way. It was just the first time I'd been his partner without knowing it. I closed the laptop. The apartment felt too still, like it was holding its breath with me. I walked to the window and looked down at the street. The sodium lights made the asphalt look wet, even though it hadn't rained in days. A couple walked by, their hands brushing together but not quite holding. I thought about how easy it is to take something apart without announcing it. A relationship, a home, a life, it's all just a sequence of subtractions. At midnight, I made coffee. Not because I needed the caffeine, but because the ritual gave my hands something to do while my mind kept turning the same corner. I set the mug on the table and wrote a single sentence on the yellow pad. Betrayal is a transaction where one party changes the terms without telling the other. Underneath it, I wrote, transactions can be reversed. The next morning, I made the first call to the servicer. This time, I didn't leave a message in a general inbox. I asked for a name, then for that name's direct line. When the assistant tried to transfer me to a department queue, I said, no, I'll wait. And I did. 37 minutes, listening to the same 4 bars of hold music until the voice I wanted picked up. I didn't tell them the whole story. No one in that business cares about family drama. I told them I was interested in acquiring the note on a recently originated mortgage. I gave them the parcel number, the loan number, the date of origination. My voice stayed even. Paperwork likes an even voice. They said they'd look into whether the note was available for assignment. I said, do that, and call me back by Friday. Then I hung up before they could promise to be in touch soon. There's a line in Dad's old mechanic's manual that I used to like. A seized bolt loosens more easily when you stop fighting it and start working with the tension. Michael had given me all the tension I needed. I wasn't going to fight the betrayal. I was going to use it. Counter moves don't happen in one grand gesture. They happen in increments, stitched together like seams no one notices until the whole garment hangs differently. I started mine on a Tuesday, the kind of Tuesday the world forgets, to mark gray, mild wind, nothing on the calendar worth remembering. Perfect for moving quietly. First call. Jonas. Jonas had been in real estate long enough to know which houses were overpriced, which sellers were desperate, and which banks had the loosest grip on their loans. We'd played cards together at the Legion Hall for years. He was the kind of man who noticed when someone folded a good hand and didn't ask why, he just stored the information. I told him I was interested in acquiring a note, not a property, just the paper that held it. I could hear him lean back in his chair over the phone. Why? He asked. I told him I was diversifying. That was the word that kept people from asking too many questions. All right, he said. Send me the details. I'll see what I can dig up. Second call. Mr. Alvarez at the credit union. He was the one who'd approved my renovation loan 15 years back without making me jump through hoops. I told him I might need proof of funds paperwork for a potential acquisition. Can you do it without me locking in a loan? I asked. He laughed. For you, Dan, I can make it look like you're a cash buyer, even if all you've got is a jar of nickels. Quote, that's the thing about living in the same place your whole life. Your credit is more than a number. It's a reputation. Third call, Darlene at the title office. If Carla was the one who told me what had happened, Darlene was the one who could make sure I didn't miss a single nail in the process of undoing it. She'd been in the business long enough to know every loophole that was still legal. I'm sending you the servicer's assignment documents as soon as I get them, I told her. Good, she said. And Dan, When you get that note, make sure your name's in the right place. Not a trust, not an LLC, just you. Sometimes personal is the point. While I waited for callbacks, I started building the file folder on the laptop, labeled with the parcel number, subfolders, county records, loan docs, correspondence, receipts. I scanned every scrap from the shoebox, even the faded gas station invoices where I'd picked up supplies for repairs. Not because I needed them for this move, they were my insurance. My way of making sure that if I ever had to show the weight of what I'd put into that house, it would be measured in more than memory. 2 days later, Jonas called back. The note's held by First Horizon Servicing, he said. Big outfit. They package their loans, sell them off quick. If you want it, you need to move before it gets bundled and disappears into a pool somewhere in Chicago. How long do I have? I asked. 2 weeks, maybe less. They've got it flagged for secondary market sale already. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the table with a map of the process spread out in front of me, every step from the bank to my name. Request the payoff amount from the servicer. Submit proof of funds and intent to purchase. Receive the assignment of mortgage. Record the assignment at the county clerk's office. Serve notice to the borrower, Michael. It was step 5 that had a weight to it. Serving notice isn't a phone call. It's a letter with legal teeth, delivered in a way you can't ignore. On Friday, the servicer called. The man on the line had the clipped efficiency of someone paid to move money, not make friends. We can sell you the note at face value plus transfer fees, he said. He named the number. It wasn't small, but it wasn't out of reach. Years of overtime, careful saving, and saying no to things I wanted meant I could wire the funds without touching the shop. I'll take it, I said. Funds need to be in by Wednesday, he replied. They will be. Over the weekend, I arranged everything. Mr. Alvarez sent over the proof of funds letter on credit union letterhead. Darlene confirmed she'd have a notary ready the minute the assignment came through. Jonas told me he knew a process server who could deliver the notice in person. On Sunday night, I went for a drive. Not past the house, not yet. Just out to Miller's Ridge, where you can see the whole town laid out under the sodium lights. I sat there with the engine off, listening to the wind brush against the truck. I thought about Dad, about the times he told me that doing a job right meant knowing which part of it needed your hands and which part just needed your patience. This was one of those jobs that needed both. On Monday, I called the servicer to confirm the wire instructions. The woman on the phone sounded surprised at how quickly I was moving. Most buyers hem and haw, she said. You don't. Most buyers aren't buying from their brother, I said, and let the silence after that carry its own weight. When the wire left my account on Tuesday morning, I felt lighter. Not happiness is for people chasing something. This was different. This was the feeling of a plan leaving your head and becoming part of the world. By Wednesday, the assignment of mortgage was in my hands. My name, my address, my right to collect every payment or to call the loan due if the borrower defaulted. Michael's name was there too, but only in the spot labeled borrower. Gah! By Thursday morning, the paper was real enough to fold. I took the assignment document out of its manila envelope and laid it flat on the kitchen table. The ink was still sharp, the notary's stamp clean in the corner. It smelled faintly of toner, and the glue from the label the servicer had slapped on the front before mailing it overnight. There's a weight to official paper that you can feel even with your eyes closed. It isn't the weight of the page. It's the weight of what it can make happen. This one gave me control over the same 4 walls I'd once painted, patched, and kept standing through winters that bent telephone poles. I called Darlene. She told me to bring it down to the title office. Don't fold it. Don't spill coffee on it. And for God's sake, don't let it sit in your truck, she said. When I got there, she ran a practiced eye over the pages, tapping her pen on the margin as she checked the legal description against the county's copy. It's clean, she said. Once we record this with the clerk, it's yours in every way that matters. She looked at me then, not curious exactly, but aware. You sure you want it in your name personally? You know that means there's no shield if this gets messy? That's the point, I told her. She nodded, and I realized she understood more than she'd ever say out loud. At the clerk's office, the recording was quick. The clerk took the document, stamped the top corner with a date and time, and slid it back across the counter. That stamp was the sound of a door closing behind me, locking in my favor. I called Jonas next. It's recorded, I told him. Then I'll make the call, he said. The process server he used was a man named Reed. built like the kind of refrigerator you can't fit through a narrow doorway. Reed had a way of making legal delivery seem like an act of inevitability rather than confrontation. "He'll sign for it," Reed promised. "Everybody signs when I show up." I didn't go watch. I didn't need to. Instead, I sat at the shop that afternoon, tightening bolts on a customer's old Massey Ferguson tractor, letting the rhythm of the wrench clear my head. Somewhere across town, my brother was opening an envelope with my name in the spot he'd been certain would belong to a bank. The notice would be plain, no underlining, no bold text, just the facts. As of date, the undersigned is the holder of your mortgage note. All payments are to be made to my address. Failure to remit payment per the terms of your note will result in action up to and including foreclosure. It's amazing how cold plain language can feel when you're on the receiving end. At 5:30, my phone buzzed. It was Jonas. "It's done," he said. Reed said he answered the door in his slippers. Didn't say a word, just signed and took the envelope. "Good," I said. That night, I didn't pour a drink to celebrate. I didn't need celebration. What I needed was quiet, so I took it. I sat in the same chair I'd sat in the night I first saw the for sale sign, only this time the stillness didn't feel like waiting. It felt like owning the clock. I thought about the look that would be on Michael's face, not the surprise, but the calculation. He'd be running numbers in his head, wondering how long he could keep up the payments, wondering if I'd raise the interest rate, wondering if he could find a way to flip the game back. That was the beauty of it. The game was over the moment my name hit the county records. From here on, it wasn't about family. It was about contract law. And law has no soft spots for shared blood. The first payment was due in 23 days. I didn't plan to call him before then. Let the silence work. Let the envelope on his counter do the talking. Because I've learned something over the years. When someone plays you without warning, the best countermove isn't shouting or slamming a door. It's making sure the next time they open one, it's you standing on the other side with the keys. It took 12 days for the first crack to show. He hadn't called. I hadn't written anything beyond the formal notice. But silence has a way of doing its own work. It seeps in, fills up the space where excuses would normally go, and makes a man start hearing his own pulse in the quiet. The call came on a Monday night, 8:42 p.m. I was cleaning up the shop, putting tools back in their places. The number on the screen was his. I let it ring twice before I picked up. Dan. His voice had that strange, tight quality, like someone trying to smile while biting down on aluminum foil. "Michael, I got your letter." He paused, as if waiting for me to break the silence. I didn't. "I guess you bought the note?" "That's right. You could have just called me about it." Quote, "You could have called me about selling the house," I said. That was it. No raised voices, no verbal fencing, just two sentences, one for each of us. And for the first time in the conversation, he didn't have an answer ready. By Wednesday, the silence had stretched enough that Jonas stopped by my shop after hours. He'd heard from a mutual acquaintance, one of those people who seemed to exist solely to carry messages between parties who weren't speaking directly. "Your brother's asking around about refinancing," Jonas said. "Problem is, nobody wants to take on a note that's already been sold, especially when the holder is, well, you." I nodded. "Let him ask." The first payment date came and went. No envelope in my mailbox. No deposit to the account I'd set up for the loan. I waited 2 more days, because sometimes the mail is slow. Then I printed out the formal notice of default and had Darlene's office send it certified. 5 days after that, the phone rang again. This time, the strain in his voice had lost its polish. "I just need a little more time," he said. "Time costs money," I replied. "The terms are in the note you signed. You know them as well as I do. You're really going to foreclose on your own brother?" "You already sold out your own brother," I said. "I'm just taking back what's mine, plus interest." That week, I saw him in town for the first time since Reed had served the papers. It was at the gas station. He was pumping fuel into his truck, staring at the ground between each squeeze of the handle. When he noticed me at the next pump, he gave a short nod. I returned it, nothing more. It was strange seeing him like that, smaller somehow. Not physically, but in presence. The man who'd grinned his way through every bad hand was now looking at the pavement, like it might tell him something he could use. I didn't have to push hard. That's the thing most people don't understand about a downfall. Once the weight shifts, gravity takes over. By the end of the second missed payment, the penalties had stacked high enough to make catching up painful. He'd either have to pay in full or watch the process roll forward toward foreclosure. At night, I'd sit at the table with the file in front of me. Every document was a rung on the ladder down, and he was climbing it in reverse. The county records, the assignment, the notices, each one moving him closer to the ground he thought he'd never touch. And I wasn't angry anymore. I was just steady. Because the thing about being betrayed is, if you stay standing long enough afterward, you learn the exact weight of payback, and you decide to carry it at your own pace. The foreclosure clock is a quiet thing. It doesn't tick like a wristwatch or chime like a mantelpiece. It just waits, marking time in weeks and notices, until the day you realize it's been running the whole time you were telling yourself you had more of it. By the third missed payment, I had the file ready. Not in the sense of threatening, no. This wasn't about rattling sabers. It was about procedure. Everything in black and white. Dated, signed, and witnessed. A clean trail from the first default to the point of no return. One afternoon, I stopped by Darlene's office. She looked over the paperwork and gave a small nod. You know, Dan, most people drag this out. They want the drama, the leverage. You're moving like you're just checking off a list. That's because I am, I told her. She smiled a little at that. You'll win this, you know. I already have, I said. This is just the part where the paper catches up. Word had started to move through town quietly at first, then not so quietly. Folks who knew both of us started acting strange around me in the hardware store or at the diner. They'd say hello, then quickly add something like, "Well, I'm sure you two will work it out," as if speaking the possibility aloud could make it true. I didn't correct them. There's no point explaining to people who still think every family story ends with a handshake and a barbecue. Michael's calls shifted tone over the weeks. At first, they'd been edged with disbelief, like he was waiting for me to reveal it was all some elaborate joke. Then came the bargaining, wrapped in half-remembered childhood stories. Remember when we fixed the fence together? We're brothers, Dan. We can figure this out. But as the deadline for reinstating the loan came into view, the calls got shorter. No more memories. No more charm, just the flat acknowledgement that time wasn't stretching for him anymore. On a cold Tuesday morning in late November, I got the letter I'd been expecting, a formal acknowledgement from his attorney that they couldn't cure the default. That was the phrase, could not cure. I sat at the table with that letter in my hand and thought about how many years I'd spent curing things he'd broken. Roof leaks, rotten beams, cracked windows. And now here was a thing I didn't have to fix. The next step was setting the auction date. In our county, once the lender files the final foreclosure notice, there's a 30-day period before the sale. I didn't plan on dragging him through the courthouse steps in public. That's not my style. But the process would move forward on paper. And that's the kind of stage where every roll is written in ink. I drove past the house only once during that month. It looked the same from the road fresh paint. The porch rail I'd replaced, still holding steady. But in the driveway was a for sale sign that hadn't been there before. Not from a big firm, just one of those by-owner jobs you get from the hardware store. It was the first real signal that he understood the math. He couldn't win. The best he could do was try to find a buyer before the auction date. But any sale would have to go through me because the mortgage was mine to release. That evening, I got another call. "Dan," he said, "I've got someone interested. They can close fast. If you just lower the payoff by a little, I can walk away clean. You get your money, I get a fresh start." "No," I said. He let out a long breath. "You don't need to ruin me over this." "I didn't ruin you," I said. "You just picked the wrong person to cut out of the deal." When the auction date finally came, it passed quietly. The paperwork moved through the system without fuss. No one showed to outbid me, not that anyone would have wanted to. Not with the liens and penalties stacked the way they were. The clerk's stamp on the deed back into my name was as final as a slammed door. The house was mine again, not in the way it used to be, but in a way that couldn't be undone without my say-so. He didn't move in. I had no intention of living there. The place had been home once, but it wasn't anymore. Instead, I listed it through Jonas, priced to move to a buyer who'd appreciate the bones and not the ghosts. 3 weeks later, it sold. Paid off the note in full with a surplus that went into my account. No family drama, no drawn-out negotiations. Just the quiet exchange of ownership, the way it should have been all along. I never saw the look on Michael's face when he got the official notice that the mortgage was closed and the property was gone from his name for good. I didn't need to. Some things you can picture without ever being in the room. And the picture I keep in my mind isn't of him angry or shouting. It's him standing in an empty driveway, looking at the space where the house used to be, his finally realizing the difference between having something and keeping it. The morning after the sale closed, I woke up to a quiet that felt different, not the strained quiet of waiting for a call, or the restless quiet of replaying a conversation in my head. This was the quiet of something finished. It was December, the air sharp enough to make each breath feel like it had weight. I brewed coffee, the same as any other morning, but I didn't take it to the kitchen table with the yellow pad. The pad was gone, filed away with the rest of the paperwork, now boxed and labeled. I didn't need to write anything down anymore. There was nothing left to track. I didn't expect to feel relief, but it came all the same, low and steady, like heat from a baseboard radiator. Owning the mortgage had been leverage. Foreclosing had been the inevitable next step. Selling the house was the closing move. Now there was no move left to make. Jonas dropped off the final check from escrow that afternoon. He handed it over without ceremony, just a plain envelope with my name written in his blocky handwriting. "It's all settled," he said. "New owners take possession next week." We didn't talk about Michael. We didn't need to. In this town, the fewer words you put on a finished story, the longer it stays finished. That night, I drove by the house one last time. The porch light was off, but I could see boxes stacked in the living room through the curtainless windows. The couple who'd bought it were younger, and from what Jonas told me, they planned to restore the garden out back. That made me feel better than I expected. I pulled over across the street, shut off the engine, and just sat there. The siding still caught the moonlight the same way it had the summer Dad painted it himself. The lilac bush by the front walk was a bare tangle now, but I knew it would bloom again in spring. The rail I'd replaced was still sturdy. I didn't go up to the porch. I didn't want to stand where my boots had once worn grooves into the steps. Some things are better left, as memories you can visit without touching. The last time I spoke to Michael was 2 weeks before the closing. He called, not to apologize, but to ask if I was happy now. "I'm done now," I told him. "That's not what I asked." "I know," I said, and hung up. He didn't call again. Walking away from something you fought to reclaim isn't easy. There's a part of you that wants to hold on to it, to keep it under your watch so no one can take it again. But the truth is, holding on can start to look a lot like the thing you were fighting against control for the sake of control, and I wasn't interested in becoming a different version of the same mistake. I didn't keep the old key. After the sale, I took it from my wallet, walked down to Miller's Creek, and tossed it in. The water took it like it had been waiting for it. It wasn't about erasing the past. It was about leaving it where it couldn't follow me home. The week the new owners moved in, I stayed away. I didn't want them to see me parked across the street, some figure from the house's past hanging around like a shadow. They deserved a clean slate, free of old ghosts, especially mine. Instead, I went fishing. Not because the lake had been calling me, but because I needed somewhere still, somewhere that didn't have 4 walls and a door with a history. It was cold enough that my breath came in little clouds. The surface of the water was flat, broken only by the ripple from my line. I wasn't thinking about catching anything. I was thinking about the kind of patience it takes to sit still and let the world move without you. Back at home, the box of documents sat on the top shelf of my closet. I'd labeled it Rourke House, closed. Inside were the receipts, the county filings, the assignments, the notices every step of the path from betrayal to resolution. I didn't open it, not because it hurt, but because I didn't need to prove anything anymore. The file wasn't my future. It was just the record of how I'd handled my past. A few days later, I ran into Michael at the post office. We both reached for the same door. He stepped back. Let me go through first. No words, no eye contact, just the faint scent of his aftershave, same kind he'd worn since high school. I collected my mail and walked past him. For a second, I thought about saying something, anything, to mark the end of it. But then I realized it didn't need marking. Some endings are better when they happen in silence, the way a candle just goes out. That night, I poured myself a glass of rum, not for celebration, for punctuation. I sat in my chair, glass in hand, and thought about Dad's old line. Do what needs doing, and don't talk about it after. It done it. And now, I was done talking about it, even to myself. The house was gone. The debt was gone. The weight was gone. What was left was mine to keep. I took the last sip, set the glass down, and let the quiet settle around me. No speeches, No calls, just the clean, still air of something finished. And that was the last time I thought of it as our house. From that night on, it was just another address. And I was just a man who no longer owed, or was owed, a thing.